The interest of the dealers in any particular branch in trade or manufactures is always in some respects different from and even opposite to that of the public. They have generally an interest to deceive and even to oppress the public. We rarely hear of the combinations of masters, though frequently of those of workmen. But whoever imagines that masters rarely combine is as ignorant of the world as of the subject. Masters are always and everywhere in a sort of tacit but constant and uniform combination, not to raise the wages of labor above their actual rate. It is not difficult to foresee which of the two parties must, upon all ordinary occasions, have the advantage in the dispute and force the other into a compliance with their terms. The masters, being fewer in number, can combine much more easily, while the man, whose whole life is spent in performing a few simple operations, has no occasion to exert his understanding for removing difficulties which never occur.
And so they came, the women. They came from Zinc Town and the hills beyond, from other mining camps, 10, 20, 30 miles away. Women we had never seen before. Women who had nothing to do with the strike. Somehow they heard about the women's picket line, and they came.
Business leaders and elite intellectuals recognized that the public had won enough rights so that they can't be controlled by force. So it would be necessary to turn to control of attitudes and opinions. These were the days when the huge public relations industry emerged in the freest countries in the world, Britain and the United States, where the problem was most severe.
As long as we keep the foundation of our business system strong, we shall be able to maintain and improve the way of life our forefathers conceived and established. And on this foundation of freedoms, continue to build a better life for themselves and their fellow man in the world of tomorrow.
The basic idea is to present a picture of the world that looks kind of like this. There's us, kind of like big happy family in the community. The honest workman going off every morning with his lunchbox, his loyal wife who's making the meals and taking care of the kids, the hard-working executive who's toiling day and night in the interests of his workers in the community, the friendly banker who's running around looking for people to lend money to, and so on and so forth. That's us, and we're all in harmony. Harmony was a big word. We're in harmony, we're all together. It's Americanism. You might take a look at that word Americanism. It's an unusual term. It's the kind of term that you find in totalitarian societies. So like in the Soviet Union, anti-Sovietism was considered the gravest of all crimes, and the Brazilian generals had some concept like that, anti-Brazilian. And then there's those bad guys out there who are trying to disrupt our harmonious lives, like that union organizer is probably a communist or an anarchist anyway, and probably un-American, and he's trying to, destroy all these wonderful things we have, and we got to band together and kick him out.
When anybody preaches disunity, tries to pit one of us against the other through class warfare or religious intolerance, that person seeks to rob us of our freedom and destroy our very lives. And we know what to do about it.
We have to defend our way of life against this. A lot of religion gets thrown in. They went after everything, the workplace, schools, churches, even sports leagues were organized. The main purposes, you look through the whole, you look at the movies and that kind of thing, there were two big things. One, of course, is to demonize unions, because they're a democratizing force, so you got to get rid of them. They're one of the ways, the main way in which poor people can get together and do something, become participants, not spectators. So they had to be demonized. And the other thing, which is a little more tricky, was to demonize government and to create what's now called a mood of anti-politics.
And that's a little tricky because remember, these guys need a powerful state in order to protect them. That's why Gingrich and the Heritage Foundation want to increase the federal budget. They're not cutting it, they're increasing it. But they're increasing the parts that feed them, like the Pentagon system. That goes up. And the other part of the state security system, the prison system, goes up. Those go up. Everything that goes to people goes down. So you had to create a mood of anti-politics, which leaves a very powerful interventionist state, but makes people hate the federal government. And the reason to make people hate the federal government is it has a defect. It's not that the government isn't bad, but the things that they're worried about are not what's bad. What they're worried about is what's good. The government has a defect, namely it's potentially influenceable by the population. Now, private corporations don't have that defect. There's nothing you can say about the GE management. But you can do something about federal government policies. And that defect, for good Madisonian reasons, has to be gotten rid of. So you have to create a mood of anti-politics where everything is blamed on the federal government, and you don't notice the real power behind it. You're not supposed to read the Fortune 500 issue. So once again, the election was essentially bought. 9 out of 10 of the victors outspent their opponents. Obama, of course, outspent McCain. If you look at we don't have final records yet from the final results, but they're probably going to be pretty much like the preliminary results a couple of months ago, which showed that both Obama and McCain were getting the bulk of their financing from the financial institutions, and for Obama, law firms, which means essentially lobbyists. It was about over a third a few months ago. Final results will probably be the same. The distribution of funding has, over time, been a pretty good predictor of what policies will be like. For those of you who are interested, there's very good scholarly work on this by Tom Ferguson at UMass Boston, what he calls the investment theory of politics, which predicts which argues essentially that elections are moments when groups of investors coalesce and invest to control the state.
Every time you pay a public relations person, you're usually trying to convince them that your interests are the same as the public. That's what you pay PR people for. You rarely see somebody coming to you and saying, vote for this policy, it'll line my pocket. Instead, they're telling you it's good for you. It's sort of like it's the McDonald's slogan on a colossal scale, we do it all for you. The ability of the press, especially the major national press, to bait candidates who ever want to do something like plain medical care for average people is really extraordinary, and they're absolutely shameless about it.
Give for the federal government unprecedented control over our medical treatment.
Look around you and read newspaper coverage and try to figure out, say reading the New York Times even, closely, which businesses are backing Obama versus which are doing McCain. The truth is they don't cover it much. Both political parties are vastly influenced by money, and that sort of plays havoc with their ability to represent you. Well, the truth is that the press in the United States is almost entirely commercial. They won't print, for reasons of profit, stuff that makes them all look bad. All they want to talk about is the horse race, who's up or who's down in a poll, or whether Obama is being too cautious in regard to X or Y. And nobody wants to tell you, please, can we have an adult analysis of the money? I mean, couldn't you aggregate these? I mean, I've had guys from the New York Times say to me, well, we'd really love to do this. When I talk to them about it, they don't love to do it. In fact, they'd like it to just go away. So they've made it go away. They illustrate my theory, i.e., people just get paid to write blather and nonsense, and that's what they do. The classical theories of democracy way underestimate the costs facing ordinary voters as they actually try to control the state. You got to find out what it's doing, you got to sort through all the people telling you what your preferences are, and then you got to try to push it across in voting, and then you got to monitor what they actually do, if they live up in effect to their campaign promises, and if they don't, you then have to do something to force them back on the course. It's that last stage that's the hardest. I mean, that is to say, if the candidate doesn't do what you say, what exactly do you do? Well, try to get them next election? Maybe. Okay, so if ordinary voters can't easily afford those costs typically, then who can? The answer is rich people, businesses. Take a situation where everybody, by hypothesis, knows that the whole population, except for the business guys themselves, want unionization. But if it costs, say, $1,000 to campaign, and that's way beyond everybody's income, the ability to raise it, it doesn't matter how many people want it, or that everybody knows already that people, if you come out to them, they'll get it. It's that you can't reach anybody with the appeal because you can't raise the money. To this day, despite all the noise about small contributions, and particularly on the Obama campaign, which made a big pitch that they were small contribution driven, we now know they were not. They were encouraging their people to break their contributions into small bits, often $200, and contribute over and over. And the studies that initially started reporting about how they were small contributor driven, I know the data sources that they work on. Neither they nor the data sources have good enough matching programs to enable you to get the same person more than once unless everything is matched. That is to say, the junior, the address, you change a middle initial and stuff like that, you won't typically catch it. And so they just miss the repeated contributions by the same folks. They keep recording them as multiple contributions.
And when Obama did organize a large number of people, and many enthusiastic people, what's called in the press Obama's army, but the army is supposed to take instructions, not to implement, to introduce, develop programs and call on its own candidate to implement them.
Typically not less than 2/5 to 60% of your contributions are going to come in from people over $500 and often over $1,000. You could think of a modern campaign like modern war as effectively the equivalent of shooting a dealer display floor full of Mercedes-Benzes at somebody. That's a lot of dough. So you need to keep refilling with Mercedes-Benzes. And that's hard to do on small contributions. And the other